Friends, in the previous part, we saw Daniel and his family living inside a lonely farmhouse in Texas, where at exactly 2:17 a.m. they saw a little girl crying outside in the rain. But she was not human. Her feet were backwards. In the end, Sophie suddenly disappeared, and a horrifying message written in blood appeared on the wall. "She is not your daughter anymore." Now the story continues. Everything in front of Daniel's eyes felt blurry. His daughter was gone, and the only thing left inside the room were those horrifying, bloody words on the wall. Emma broke down crying desperately. "Sophie, Sophie." But the only sound echoing through the farmhouse was the terrifying howl of the wind outside. Then suddenly heavy footsteps began running across the ceiling above them. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone barefoot sprinting through the upper floor. Daniel grabbed his flashlight with trembling hands and slowly walked upstairs while Emma followed behind him in fear. The moment they reached the hallway, their blood froze. Wet, tiny handprints covered the walls from one side to the other, and those marks led directly toward the attic room. The attic door stood slightly open. Soft laughter echoed from inside. Daniel slowly pushed the door open. Darkness filled the entire attic. Then the flashlight suddenly landed on a figure standing in the corner, and Daniel's breathing stopped. Sophie stood there silently, but she did not look normal anymore. Her long hair covered most of her face, and her body twisted unnaturally. Emma cried and rushed toward her. "Sophie, baby." But suddenly Sophie slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were completely black. Then she smiled and whispered, "She is not alone anymore." Suddenly the attic door slammed shut by itself. The room instantly became freezing cold. Then from the darkness behind Sophie, the same little girl from outside appeared again. But this time her face was clearly visible. Her skin looked burned and black smoke slowly escaped from her mouth. She slowly walked behind Sophie and stood there smiling. Emma screamed in terror. Daniel tried grabbing Sophie, but suddenly she shoved him with unbelievable force, sending him crashing against the wall. At that exact moment, children's laughter echoed throughout the attic. But there were only 2 girls inside the room. Then shadows began moving across the walls as if dozens of invisible people surrounded them. Slowly, the little girl placed her hand on Sophie's head and whispered, "Now she belongs to me." Suddenly, Sophie screamed in pain while black liquid started pouring from her eyes. Emma ran toward her daughter, crying hysterically, but something invisible violently threw her backward. Panicking, Daniel rushed downstairs and grabbed his shotgun. But when he returned to the attic seconds later, the room was empty. Sophie was gone. The little girl was gone. Only wet footprints remained across the wooden floor leading toward the darkest corner of the attic. Then suddenly Sophie's voice whispered behind Daniel, "Daddy!" Slowly he turned around, and his scream echoed through the entire farmhouse. Sophie stood behind him, but her face no longer looked human. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide across her face, while darkness moved inside her eyes like living shadows. Then in a soft whisper she said, "She is waiting downstairs." Suddenly every light inside the farmhouse began flickering violently. From below, something started dragging itself across the floor. Grrr! Scrrr! It sounded heavy, wet, and inhuman. Emma started crying in fear. Then soft children's laughter echoed from downstairs. But it was not just one child laughing anymore. It sounded like dozens of little girls laughing together inside the house. Slowly, Daniel walked toward the staircase, holding the shotgun tightly in his shaking hands. The moment he reached the living room, his heart nearly stopped. Bloody tiny handprints covered every wall. The wooden floor was completely wet, as if someone dripping with rainwater had walked through the house. Then suddenly, the television turned on by itself. At first, the screen showed only darkness. Then slowly, the face of the little girl appeared on the screen. Her eyes were completely white now. Smiling slowly, she whispered, "You opened the door." At that exact moment, Emma screamed behind him. Daniel spun around instantly. Sophie stood at the top of the stairs, but behind her dozens of small black shadow figures stood silently watching them. Their glowing eyes filled the darkness of the hallway. Then suddenly, the entire farmhouse began shaking violently as if something enormous had awakened outside. The old metal bells hanging outside the house suddenly started ringing by themselves. Ding, ding, ding. Then 3 slow knocks echoed through the farmhouse. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel's blood froze instantly because the front door was already standing wide open.
Friends, if you want to discover who is really outside the farmhouse and what terrifying creature has taken control of Sophie, make sure you subscribe to Fear Inside right now, because the next part will be even darker and more terrifying.